Okay, good morning, everybody. My name's Angus Armstrong, and I am lucky enough to be the Director of Rebuilding Macroeconomics. Thank you all very much indeed for joining this virtual conference. It's the second one we've done this week, but it's bigger than the first one. So fingers crossed that the technology goes fairly smoothly, and I'm sure I can rely on your patience if we have any hiccups. Normally, we start off with our long list of housekeeping rules, but there's virtually none because you're in your own home. But there's only two that I'd like to say at the beginning. First of all, if everybody who is not speaking can put themselves on mute, mute their microphones, it just reduces the background noise, please. Now, we have the capability to do it from here, but we'd rather that people just could do it themselves. So we're very grateful if everybody could do that. And the second is there's a chat facility, which depending on how it's set up on this PC that we've got here, it's on the bar at the bottom is a sort of thought bubble, and then it says chat. If you use that for any questions, whether they're clarification questions, the chairperson of the session can either raise them or the speaker can see them, hopefully, and answer them. Or that's where we can also post the questions, and the chairperson can collect those questions and then refer to them in the discussion following the presentations. So today's conference has really been put together by two of the Rebuilding Macroeconomics hubs, the Finance and the Institutions hub, which are run by Ekaterina and Gary Dimsky, respectively, and they are going to be chairing two of today's sessions. And so the first session is about central bank independence, and of course, a lot of these questions have, I guess, very unfortunately, received greater resonance with what's going on in today's environment. So we've got central bank independence, and then the second panel's on objectives. And the third panel is on instruments. At least two of these panels, there's already been questions being asked in a number of major countries. But the first panel on central bank independence goes really to the institutions issue and is very fundamental to how we've thought about central banking, at least over the last 2.5 decades, or maybe even 3 decades now. So I'm going to pass over to Ekaterina Svetlova from the University of Leicester, who runs our monetary research hub, for her to chair the meeting. I believe that Ed Balls, we're still waiting for Ed to join, but we have spoken to him or had correspondence from him as recent as yesterday. So I think that I know that he's got a lot on in terms of travel at the moment. So I expect that he'll be joining. But Ekaterina, if I can pass over to you to chair this session, please. And yes. I hope everybody finds this very enlightening. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So on the first panel, we have 3 scheduled speakers. Martin, he is commentator on European economics at Financial Times. And this year, he published a book, The Economics of Belonging. It came out this year. And in this book, he proposed new approaches to economic policy, particularly the issues of inequality and economic justice. And Martin, we are very happy to hear your thoughts on central banking as well. Please.
Thank you very much. Can people hear me? Does this work?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, my computer decided to do updates just as I was turning it on before this. But we're all new to this and hopefully tolerant. But I hope everyone's well and healthy. It's kind of an interesting time to be thinking about what's a pretty old debate because, in a sense, we're all rethinking everything. But I will make some points about central bank independence that are thoughts I've had, and maybe end on some reflections about what's going on right now with the COVID crisis. So when we talk about central bank independence, what we mean, of course, is independence from a particular type of influence, namely the influence of elected politicians. So I think it's worth starting off by just going back to thinking about why one thought that independence from elected politicians might be a good idea. And most people here will know the theory back from the 80s and 90s that if you have politically influenced central banking, you will get interest rate setting and monetary policy that is short-sighted, follows political cycles, and ends up getting us worse macroeconomic outcomes than we could have, in particular higher inflation with no output gain um, as a reward, as a trade-off. I think on the whole, that justification for central bank independence has held up reasonably well, and it's worked reasonably well. And I think this is not because central banking has been as good as it could have been. But when it hasn't been as good as it could have been, it's not because of the wrong kind of political influence. And one reason for that is that independence in practice has meant operational independence. And also legally, it's operational independence. So central banks in a standard regime independently choose the means to the end that they've been set in their legal mandate and possibly through an ongoing political process. But that does not mean that the central bank is beyond political control or automatic accountability in the sense that any democratic society needs to ensure. So central banks choose, traditionally where they set the target interest rate. Since the global financial crisis and earlier in Japan, they've had to pick and choose other tools. And they've been free to do that. And the fact that they've been free to do that has probably been a good thing. So I think it has been more or less, easier for central banks to choose unconventional monetary policy tools as and when needed than it would have been in a less independent regime in terms of less operational independence. And one example of that, I think, is the European Central Bank, which paradoxically, the European Central Bank has the strongest legal independence, but may at the same time be one of the politically most dependent central banks because the members of the governing council have these pressures from their home member state. And we see that the reason, I think, why the European Central Bank was so late with doing quantitative easing compared to other central banks, I think we have to put that down to the political difficulty of doing so. So one lesson here is that the kind of legal independent status isn't everything. There is still both influence and accountability. Now, to the extent that you can isolate the technical central banking, the operational goal choosing from politics, that's a good thing. That doesn't mean you should avoid political accountability, and no central bank has avoided political accountability. We have regular processes for hearings in parliaments and so on. And more importantly, it's really still always up to democratically elected politicians to set the goal that the central bank is meant to pursue. So I think, on the whole, independence as we've had it has worked reasonably well. Now, what has happened is that the economy or the problem faced by macroeconomic policymakers has changed almost beyond recognition from the 80s and 90s. And it's changed. It changed with the global financial crisis and the surrounding complex of problems, including secular stagnation, probably permanently low equilibrium interest rates, and so on, which are partly caused by the financial crisis, partly underlying dynamics. All of these have forced us to rethink how one does monetary policy and indeed fiscal policy properly. And secondly, today, we are faced with this really extraordinary situation where, in very short order, we're talking about weeks, I think most economists and a lot of economic policymakers have realized that the kind of macroeconomic policy needed now is really only comparable to wartime macroeconomics. So we have top top economist considering, contemplating GDP reductions of 30, 40, 50% for a few months at least, needs for fiscal deficits in the double digits, it's enormous stuff. And how we think about central banking in that context obviously changes too. So these are very, early reflections because we're all making this up a bit as we go along. But it seems to me that it's very clear now that monetary financing, direct monetary financing, is very much a live possibility. It should certainly be a live option to discuss inside central banks and between fiscal and monetary policymakers. I don't think that requires changing our concept or indeed our legal structure for central bank independence. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that independent professional central bankers are fully aware of how suddenly the fiscal outlook has changed. They're fully aware of the need for governments to dramatically increase public debt ratios. And I think they are, on the whole, alert to the fact that monetary policy plays a part in making that possible. And in fact, I would add that it's better that they do so from a starting point of legal independence than if they were kind of corralled in and ordered about by elected politicians. So this is going to be my sort of finishing gambit, if you like, to put out for discussion, that we're actually well served by structures that were set up in the 90s, because they allow, with some more, I think, robustness, central bankers to do whatever it takes, to copy a phrase, but to do the thing that is actually required of them to do their job in sustaining the economy and economic and financial and monetary stability. And they will do so professionally and with more credibility than if we had a less independent legal structure. So I haven't timed myself and don't know how much time I have, so I'll just stop there.